You're gonna have to have some sort of sign,
like a
to remind
post-it
you.
note.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
taped to
just
like
something.
the inside of the
Yeah.
Yeah,
the
All right, well,
laptop.
you're all here and you got it, so you can just explain it to your friends who weren't here.
We can do the oral history.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly, the oral history of this class. Okay, let me just get the screen share going. Because I was thinking like, oh yeah, I'm doing the hybrid thing, but that's okay. So, all right. So we are going to start out by looking at kashrut, at looking at, as we talked about, eating, what we can eat, what we can't eat, and we're gonna try to cover some of the basics here. The point here is not for you to leave this class totally understanding kashrut. If you do, that would be amazing, but not expecting that. But we're just gonna learn a little bit together, and we're gonna like see how these rules and these laws grow and develop. So, do we have a reader in the room for these first couple of verses? One from Genesis and one from Leviticus, starting again, as we said, with our biblical texts. Elliot, you looked at me. Go ahead.
Okay.
Volunteered.
Every moving thing that liveth shall be food for you. As the green herb have I given you. Only flesh with life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat.
Okay, so actually pause there. Okay, so this is God talking to Noah, just so that we're all on the same page of where we are. And every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, just like all the green herbs. Only you shouldn't eat the blood. That there's something here about eating the blood that God doesn't like. But God says to Noah, go to town. Anything that's out there, you can eat. Now, we're going to Leviticus, where God narrows the parameters of that for the Jewish audience. So here, yeah, actually, if you could do a Leviticus 11:3 and 9 now, Elliot. So both of these two verses.
Whatsoever has a cleft hoof and is wholly cloven-footed, and chews its cud among the beasts that you may eat. That you may eat of all that are in the waters, whatsoever has fins and scales in the waters, in the seas and in the rivers you may eat.
Great. So this is the really like bare bones of kashrut, and then there's also a verse that I forgot to put in here about birds. Birds, it basically has to be able to fly and it can't eat meat. So winged things with feathers, good if they can fly and are not meat eaters. If they're meat eaters, bad.
So no flightless bird is kosher.
Correct. Ostrich.
I know ostrich wasn't.
Yeah.
I was wondering about things like rayas and emus and.
Yeah. No dice, has to fly. And chickens count as flying, even though they can't really go that high.
Like a jumping bird counts, but
Exactly. Yeah, it's got to be able to at least get off the ground a little bit.
But before chickens.
No penguins.
No
Yeah,
penguin.
good.
Very good, Zach. Very
No
good. No
penguin.
penguin. But so these are the kind of broad strokes. But as we said, the Torah gives broad strokes, but then we have to figure out exactly what this means. So okay, right. Then this is the other part of what you can and cannot eat, specifically around meat. So Elliot, you were doing such a good job. Will you also read from Deuteronomy?
If the place where the Lord has chosen to establish God's name is too far from you, you may slaughter any of the cattle or sheep that the Lord gives you, as I have instructed you, and you may eat to your heart's content in your settlements.
Okay, so this is kind of a confusing passage, but essentially what the rabbis are going to take this to mean, and I'm going to skip through all of the accordions for you here, is that God told you how to slaughter things and in the temple, and originally you were only supposed to eat meat if it was in the temple. You were only supposed to eat meat if it was in the temple and it was sacrificed to God. But God says you might live kind of far away, and you might want to eat meat, even if you live in Haifa, and you can't get to Jerusalem so easily. So
it would spoil on the way home.
What?
It would spoil on the
It
way
would
home.
spoil on the way home.
They didn't have refrigerators.
No refrigeration. So therefore, you still have to slaughter the animals in the same method that you would in the temple, but you can eat them at home. And that method, which we're not going to talk about too much tonight, but I did bring for those of you who are here in person, I brought my knife, my shechita knife. There's a special knife that you use that has to be a special sharpness that you test in certain ways and you sharpen it in certain ways. And there's very specific rules that the rabbis are going to develop because this is very unclear, right? this doesn't tell you how to keep kosher. This gives you like some broad strokes things. So now we're gonna go to how you keep kosher. But before we get there, because before law codes, there developed this genre of writing that rather than try to tell you what exactly to do, was why do these laws exist in the first place? This was a genre of writing, and we're not going to dwell here very long because we don't have that much time, but it was a genre of writing that said, we're going to go through law by law, and instead of explaining how to do it in your life, we're going to tell you why this law exists. It's a genre called Ta'ameh HaMitzvot, or the meanings of the commandments. And this is where you'll see the first quote that we have is from Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed, which you might remember was written by Maimonides, Rambam, exactly. Same guy who wrote the book that says this is how you do everything, also wrote a book that said this is why you do everything. Usually people picked one or the other. He was an overachiever. So can we get someone who is online to be our reader here?
I can read. I can do it. I maintain that the food which is forbidden by the law is unwholesome. There is nothing among the forbidden kinds of food whose injurious character is doubted except pork. But also in these cases, the doubt is not justified, for pork contains more moisture than necessary for human food, and too much of superfluous matter. The principal reason why the law forbids swine's flesh is to be found in the circumstance that its habits and its food are very dirty and loathsome.
Okay, great.
It has what?
There.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, what's Rambam saying? Why don't we eat foods that are forbidden?
It's bad for us.
It's bad for us.
Right.
Rambam's saying the reason this law exists, that we only eat certain animals, is because the animals that we're not supposed to eat are bad for us. That's why we don't do it. That's the reasoning. Okay.
From a physician.
What? What do you expect from a physician? Exactly, as Elliot said, he was a doctor. That's what he did. So, this next one is from Sefer HaChinuch, and Sefer HaChinuch was an anonymous writing that was goes through the 613 commandments in the Torah, and says for each one, Sefer HaChinuch literally means the book of education, and it says this is the kind of pedagogical reason why God gave us each of these commandments. This is what they're supposed to do. So let's read here. Can we get someone in the room?
I could read.
Go for it.
What we wrote in the warning of the torn animal in the order of the Mishmatim is from the roots of the commandment. As God knows that all of the foods that he distanced from his people that he chose have properties in them that injure bodies and that stop the souls from activating them and elevating them with good deeds. Therefore, he distanced us from them in order that the souls will make their impact and that a bad constitution and a blockage of the heart not seal the door in front of them, as I wrote there.
Perfect. Little convoluted, but what is Sefer HaChinuch saying? Why don't we eat non-kosher things?
Because they're bad for us.
Because they're bad for you, but in a different way. They're bad for you spiritually. That Rambam says they're bad for you physically, that they're gonna like physically damage your body. Sefer HaChinuch says they're also bad for you spiritually. If you eat these non-kosher things, it blocks up your neshama, it blocks up your soul. You can't get out and do the good deeds you're supposed to do. So that's another answer for why do we do this kosher keeping thing? And then we're just gonna read one more answer here. This is the Rav Chaim Luzzatto, known as the Shadal. He's an Italian 18th century writer. He's a little bit later on, but he also is gonna enter in with his own reasons on why we keep kosher. Do I have an online reader?
I will.
Or Shelby?
The prohibition to eat certain foods is to separate the Jewish people from the nations and also to uplift the soul, because eating disgusting things leads to a lessening of the soul. And the reason for kashrut is not for health reason, but because camel meat is good for health and is beloved by people of the East.
Great. So we have a few things here. Does anyone want to take a stab? What is Shadal saying? There's going to have 3 main points here.
Well, it separates us from other people.
It separates us from other people. That part of the point of kashrut is to separate. Thing number 2.
It protects the soul.
Protects the soul, so kind of like Sefer HaChinuch. And thing number 3.
It's not for health reasons.
It's not for health reasons. Rambam's an idiot. Okay, don't listen to Rambam. So and again, one of the things that we've been doing here in this class every time that we meet is we see that it's okay to disagree with rabbis because the rabbis disagree with rabbis. And it's not that always the rabbis disagree with rabbis because they know so much more. Sometimes they just disagree. Sometimes it, like Rambam thought that camel meat was bad and Shadal says no, it's good because these other people eat it. It doesn't have to do with how much Jewish text either of them knew to be able to say that. They just disagree. And so what I want us to take away from that is it's okay for us to also have opinions. Sometimes we can defer to people who have more knowledge than us on certain topics. And like, I wouldn't challenge Rashi on like, who knows more Midrash, because Rashi had this like crazy encyclopedic, knowledge. But there are some things that I know more about than Rashi because I live in the modern world and I understand how science works in ways that he didn't. And so there are things that we can bring our own what's called our own sechel, our own svara, our own intuition into our understandings of Jewish text. And sometimes we can say, Rambam thought camel meat was bad. We know camel meat is good. So Rambam maybe didn't know so much what he was talking about. Okay, moving on. Okay. Then I also brought some Rav Soloveitchik, who's great, but we're going to kind of keep moving because we don't have time for this stuff. Okay, great. So, who wants, so now we're going back to the Torah because there's one other big part of kashrut that we didn't talk about yet. Any guesses?
Milk and meat.
Bingo,
Yeah.
milk and meat. All right, so, whoa, that's a knife. Who wants to read for us from Shmot, from the book of Exodus? Great, go for it, Charlie.
The choice first fruits of your soil you shall bring to the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk.
Wonderful. So, there's a great joke. And the joke goes like this. The joke says, Moses was up at the top of Mount Sinai, and God says to Moses, Moses, do not boil a kid in its mother's milk. And Moses says, oh, so you don't want us to eat meat and milk together? And God says, no, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. And Moses says, oh, so you want us to wait a long time between eating meat and milk? God says, no, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. And Moses says, oh, so we should have 2 separate sets of dishes, and if possible, 2 dishwashers and 2 ovens, and really do everything we can to keep meat and milk totally separate. And God says, you know what, Moses? Have it your way.
I've heard it.
But that is kind of what happens here. There is the entire basis of Jewish separation of milk and meat is in this pasuk and 2 other verses that say the exact same thing. The same exact statement appears 3 times in the Torah. In the Hebrew, it says, Al tivashel gdi b'chelav imo. Do not boil a kid in its mother's milk. There's some question about whether here milk actually means milk or whether it might mean fat, because it's the same 3 letters in Hebrew is milk and fat. So depending on how you punctuate it, it could mean like don't broil a kid in its mother's fat. But we tend to translate it as do not boil a kid in its mother's milk. That's neither here nor there. Just an
Was
interesting.
the Hebrew
translation.
different for the young of goats and sheep and cattle, or they have different names?
Pretty similar. Gdi is like a young goat. It's a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. I was wondering if it's kid is the only translation. Could it be calf or lamb?
No, it's
No.
a kid. It is a young
So it's
goat.
only goats we're talking about here.
You might think that, Elliot. You might think it's just goats that we're talking about here, but boy, are you wrong? Because get ready to be accordion. Okay? You started out here. We're going big time. Okay, so let's start with the Mishnah, because that's our first step. We have our Torah, we have our verse. Let's see what the Mishnah says. All right, so the tractate of Mishnah and Talmud that deals with kashrut is called Chulin. It mostly deals with the slaughter of animals, but then it also delves into some other kashrut issues also. So here we are going to read a little bit about this meat and milk mixture. So can I get a reader on the Zoom?
Okay, I will.
Go for it.
A mixture of the meat of a permitted animal with the milk of a permitted animal is forbidden to cook and forbidden from benefit. A mixture of the meat of a permitted animal with the milk of a prohibited animal, or a mixture of the meat of a prohibited animal with the milk of a permitted animal, is permissible to cook and permissible for benefit. Rabbi Akiva.
Pause. Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to explain what this means because I see some like questioning faces and Alan is up there going like, huh, what's going on here? So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So basically we learned in the Torah, right, what are permitted and prohibited animals? We're talking about, do they have cleft hooves? Do they chew their cud? You know, a kosher animal, regardless of whether it's slaughtered properly, we know there's a certain category of kosher animal, a certain category of not kosher animal. So the Mishnah is saying, if it's a permitted animal, so cows, goats, etc., and that the milk comes from, and it's a permitted animal that the meat comes from, not only can you not eat it, but you as a Jew cannot cook them together, and you cannot benefit from their cooking. So if I own a shawarma stand, I cannot sell a cheese lamb kebab as a Jewish person.
How would you do that anyway?
Okay, fine. If I own a hoagie stand, I can't sell a cheesesteak. Better?
Okay, that's better.
Okay. So what the Mishnah is saying is not only am I not allowed to eat them, I'm not allowed to cook them together, and I'm not allowed to benefit. I am not allowed to benefit monetarily from their sale. However, if it's the milk of if it's cow milk, pig meat, because pig is a prohibited animal, then I can cook them together, and I can't eat them because one of them's a prohibited animal. So I'm not going to eat it, but I can cook it and I can benefit from it. So I can sell a pork taco with cheese on it as a Jewish person, but I can't sell a beef taco with cheese on it.
So they actually had, so the statement was actually from a benefit from a economic standpoint for Jewish people.
Exactly. It is benefit is from an economic standpoint. It's can I sell?
I don't think I've ever seen that or understood that before.
So wait.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff in around kashrut specifically that the rabbis talk about. Can you benefit from it? And benefit always means monetarily. It means economically. It means fiscally. And the question is, can I sell this? They talk about this for wine. They talk about this for liquor. They talk about it for all sorts of different kosher issues. It's not just can I eat it. Is it so bad that I can have nothing to do with it, or am I allowed to sell it and benefit from it monetarily?
And you
So
could.
you can sell chicken parm, but you can't sell a cheeseburger.
What?
No, you
No.
can't.
Neither one.
It is a permitted animal, and the cheese comes from a permitted animal.
So, okay. So what is it saying about wild animals and birds? Okay, so like an ostrich, for
Correct.
example. Okay.
Correct. Yeah,
So you can sell ostrich parmesan.
Yeah.
exactly. Now, right now, so what is important about the second half of it, we're not going to read the whole thing, is that there's this idea that the fact that it says you may not cook a kid in its mother's milk 3 times is important. That here in this particular Mishnah, they're going to use that to exempt things. But as we're going to see moving forward, they're going to actually say the reason that this question of why does it say it 3 times is going to have a lot to do with how expansive the laws became around meat and milk. So we're not going to go into all this with wild animal and torn and birds and all that. Don't worry about that. It's not that important. The important thing here is that already there's a concept in the Mishnah that it's important that it was said 3 times. So that's going to carry some sort of gravity. Okay? Great. Moving on. So we are now in.
I have one question. One
Go ahead.
question. Are there? Is the fact that it's mentioned 3 times? Are there other important items or issues that are mentioned repeatedly that raises this as a high level of importance versus other mentions? Maybe it's something else is mentioned only once.
Absolutely. There's so for example, the laws of not oppressing a stranger are mentioned 35 times. The laws around nidah, around menstrual purity, are mentioned in 2 different places, and the rabbis learned very different things from those 2 places.
Yeah.
And they expand things based on the fact that it shows up in 2 places. There are a lot of things in Torah that if they come up multiple times, the rabbis will say, so from this place we can learn this, and from that place we can learn that, because there's a rabbinic idea that there's no redundancy in the Torah that doesn't have meaning. That if there is redundancy, then it must have meaning.
Right.
Therefore, if it appears multiple times, there must be multiple things we can learn from it.
Got it.
Okay, wait, me?
Oh, yep, bang.
Okay, so, yeah, I am doing other things, so I'm only sort of half listening, but I'm trying to understand. My father, who was like the best butcher in town and provided prime beef to all the high-end restaurants, which of course was not kosher. It was okay for him to sell a filet mignon, but it was not okay for him to sell a filet wrapped with a piece of bacon, correct?
No, actually, he could have sold a
He did.
fillet wrapped with a piece of bacon. What he could not have done is cooked that fillet in butter and then sold it.
Ah,
He could sell the fillet wrapped in bacon as long as he wasn't eating it. That's not a problem. The problem comes because, again, this repetition of milk and meat, that one of the things that it says is that you could not even benefit from it if it was something that was cooked together.
non-permissible.
All right, so we're gonna move on. So that was the Mishnah of Chulin. So now we're expanding our accordion. We're going to the Talmud. So we're in Masechet Chulin, in the Talmud now on page 105, and we have this conversation between Rav Asi and Rabbi Yochanan. So do I have someone in the room who wants to read this conversation? Nathan, go for it.
Rav Asi asked Rabbi Yochanan, how long should one wait between eating meat and cheese? He said, not at all. Really? But Rav Chizda said, one who eats meat isn't allowed to eat cheese. One who eats cheese is allowed to eat meat. Rather, Rav Asi must have asked, how long should one wait between eating cheese and meat? He said, not at all.
Okay, so pause there. I just want to note what just happened here because this is hilarious and wonderful Talmud. So Rav Asi asked Rabbi Yochanan, how long should one wait? And he said, not at all. And then the Talmud asks, wait, really? That can't be right. Because we have this other quote from Rav Chisda who said, one who eats meat isn't allowed to eat cheese right after, is the kind of fill in there that you should know. But one who eats cheese is allowed to eat meat right after. There's a tradition in Judaism that you can't eat cheese right after you eat meat, but you can eat meat right after you eat cheese. Or not right, you're supposed to wash out your mouth, wait 10 minutes, but there's a much less of a waiting period between milk and meat. So then the Talmud goes back and says, it must have been that whoever quoted this said it wrong. Actually, Rav Asi asked, how long should one wait between eating cheese and eating meat? And then he said not at all. Because they want to make Rabbi Yochanan right. They don't want to say Rabbi Yochanan is wrong here. So they say, oh, we must have remembered that they asked the question backwards. So it goes back and it flips the question. Now, one might ask, why do you have that whole discussion? Why don't you just say the end part, which is, Rav Asi asked Rabbi Yochanan, how long should one wait between eating cheese and eating meat? And he said, not at all. That would be the kind of, if the Talmud had an editor, that's what would have happened. And again, when we're thinking in our accordion brains, that's what the Rif would do. The Rif, who's trying to strip the Talmud down to say just what you should or shouldn't do, he's going to take away that whole conversation because it doesn't really make that much of a difference in the long run because we still get to the same point in the end.
Didn't the Talmud have editors, the redactors?
Yes, but they were not redacting for efficacy. Okay, so Nathan.
Rav Acha bar Yosef said to Rav Chizda, the meat that is between the teeth, what do we make of it? To reference the verse, the meat was still between their teeth. Our Ukva says, in comparison to my father, regarding this matter, I am vinegar, the son of wine. My father, when he ate meat, would not eat cheese until the same time the next day. Even if I won't eat it at this meal, I'll eat it at the next meal.
Great. So again, here we're getting some law through story, right? Rav bar Yosef said to Rav Chisda, you have meat between your teeth. That they have. There's this verse in Numbers where it says there's meat between your teeth. We all know when we eat meat, we sometimes get it stuck in the teeth, and so they're saying that's why they're giving this as a reason. It's not explicit, it's implicit, but that's why you're not eating cheese right after eating meat, because there's a concern that they're going to mix in your mouth, because cheese is going to kind of go through your mouth more quickly, whereas meat's going to stick around.
Can't you just use dental floss?
They did not
They
have
don't
that.
have
They
dental
were wiping their tuchuses with rocks. You think they had dental floss? Okay, so, sorry, no, they didn't have dental floss. That's going down as a highlight of text meeting. If we make t-shirts, that's what's going on. All right, so no, they didn't have dental floss. But so then Mar Ukva says, My father, when he ate meat, he wouldn't eat cheese until the same time the next day. He would wait 24 hours. Me, I won't eat it at this meal, but I'll eat it the next meal. So already we see halakha is developing. Jewish law is developing here in the Talmud, that in one generation it might have been 24-hour period waiting. He's saying, wait a few hours. I wait till the next meal. Great. Okay. Now we are going to go to the Mishnah Torah. We're going to go to Rambam. Rambam, it's going to be very clear. He's not going to mess around. Do we have a reader? Someone online? Cindy, I see you.
You're muted.
Let's see, it is biblically forbidden either to cook or to eat meat with milk. Anyone who cooks both together as little as the size of an olive is to be lashed. As it is written, you shall not boil a kid in his mother's milk. So two, anyone who eats both the meat and the milk that have been cooked together, even as little as size of an olive, is to be lashed, even if he has not done the cooking himself.
Great. Rambam is straightforward. Rambam is not telling any stories. He's not saying my grandpappy did this and this is what happened here. He's saying don't cook them together. Don't eat them together. Even if it's as little as an olive, even if it's not that much, you cannot mix them. Don't do it very bad.
What if it's smaller than an olive?
We have a great rabbinic mind in our midst. Rachel Apple is expanding the accordion here. So there's a concept in Jewish law that I'll just mention briefly called batel b'shishim, which means something is canceled if it's 1/60th. So some of it has to do not just with the size of how much you're eating, that the rabbis imagine you're not going to eat anything that's smaller than the size of an olive. Why would you put anything in your mouth that's like smaller than an olive if you're trying to if it's a cooked dish?
I mean, like some recipes call for like a pinch of something. So maybe it's like a pinch of something that mixes together.
Right. So, but this is saying you would be eating the size of an olive. So you shouldn't eat even that little of it. Your question is to what if it's a very little bit of milk mixed in a large meat dish? There's something called batel b'shishim, which means, and Estelle, I see your hand, I'll get to in a sec. You have a big pot of meat soup and a chicken soup, and your cat walks by and knocks a pitcher of milk over, and enough milk spills in that it's like 1/100th of the total volume of the soup. That's okay. You can't do it on purpose. You cannot use a recipe that calls for a little bit of milk in a meat soup, but if less than 1/60th spills in and it was an accident, that's okay.
But if it was on purpose, you can't eat it.
On purpose, can't eat it. So this is a fascinating part of Jewish law that in Hebrew there's called lechatchila and b'diavad, which means the ideal case and the after the fact case. So there's the ideal case of you have no milk in your meat at all, and if I intentionally do something that's against it, not okay. But b'diavad, after the fact, if something happened that I wasn't planning on happening, then it can be okay. Estella, you have your hand up.
Actually, I have two questions. One is, what if the kid is not related to the milk? In other words, can you mix the meat from a kid and milk from an animal other than its mother?
Right. So as we saw in the Mishnah, if we go back to the Mishnah, by the time of the Mishnah, so by 100 CE, we're not talking about kids and mothers anymore. We're talking about the milk of a permitted animal and the meat of a permitted animal.
Okay.
So they've already done away with the whole kid-mother thing. That's
okay.
Gone. We've already established this is about any permitted animal's milk and any permitted animal's meat. Now, the question of how chicken became to be meat is a fascinating, and that could be a totally... At one point, chicken was parv. Chicken was not considered meat. It then became meat. That's a different class. We don't have time for all of that tonight, but it's an interesting question. So at one point, you could have sold chicken parm, Cheryl, but no longer. Okay, what was question 2, Estella?
What's the deal with shrimp? Why is it considered unhealthy or unclean or improper?
So shrimp it lives in the water and it does not have fins or scales. So
what?
So if you remember in Leviticus,
Right, it says only fish that have the fins and the scales.
Right.
But
Things you may eat of all that in the water, whatever has fins and scales.
so period. There's no asking why or looking into it or anything.
No, the rabbis are not particular. There's some question of like, but what? So swordfish is like a huge argument in Jewish law because it starts out without fins and then it grows fins, or the opposite. I don't remember. At one point in its life, it has fins, and at another point of life, it doesn't. Sorry, not fins, scales. At one point of its life, it has scales. Another point of life, it doesn't have scales. Boy, do they have some arguments over whether you can eat swordfish. But no, this is very, very clear in Leviticus, and we don't argue with it. So no shrimp, no lobster, no mussels, no.
I thought that it had to have easily removable fins and scales.
Not fins, but scales. Yes, the scales need to be, because that's why eels technically have scales, but they don't come off easily. That you have to be able to run. The rabbis in the Mishnah and the Talmud, they talk about you have to be able to run a knife over them, and the scales have to come off. That you can't have to like cut off the skin in order to get the scales off. They have to be
some
somewhat
fish
easily
like a
removed.
gar that has scales, but they're very hard. In fact, they
Sure.
were used as projectile points by Native Americans, so they would not be easy to remove.
Cool. All right. So now we're just going to quickly look at the Shulchan Aruch just so you can see it, because I have one thing that I want to tell you about the Shulchan Aruch. So we are here, Yoreh Deah. So the Shulchan Aruch is separated into 4 sections. One of them is Yoreh Deah. We don't have time to talk about what all the other ones are. And so Yoreh Deah, and what it says is here we get a different reason for why it's said 3 times. It said it's written in the Torah 3 times. Once for the prohibition of cooking, once for the prohibition of eating, and once for the prohibition of receiving benefit. So remember those 3 things that we talked about. Here the Shulchan Aruch is saying, that's why it says 3 times. So each one of them is a different prohibition. Then it says the prohibition of. So then what I wanted to point out is this italics at the bottom, where it says all meat and milk mixtures that are not forbidden from the Torah are permitted to benefit from. The Shulchan Aruch was written this is just good kind of background information. Shulchan Aruch was written in the 16th century by Rabbi Yosef Karo, who was a Sephardi Jew. At the same time, there was another rabbi in Poland named Rabbi Moshe Isserles, who was an Ashkenazi Jew, who was working on a very similar project. Yosef Karo beat him to the punch. He won. He got his published first. Everyone was buying it. So what Rabbi Moshe Isserles did was he basically took the Shulchan Aruch and he added on his commentary. So again, accordioning, Shulchan Aruch, he added on to not to every single sentence, but to many sentences he would say, and here's how we do it the Ashkenazi way. So like, yes, this is right, but also we do it this way, or, there's another animal here. Yeah, we make milk from almonds and place bird meat in it. Here, you can see at the end of number 3. This is the Rabbi Moshe Isserles saying, you don't know about this, Yosef Karo, because you're up in Sephardi land, but here in Eastern Europe, we have this thing that we do, and it's okay. So that's just, so again, the accordioning did not stop with the Shulchan Aruch. It then started getting bigger again. That was the last time that it shrunk down really effectively. And then since then, we've been in a period of growth, of getting bigger. There's
How long are we
more.
gonna have to wait for somebody to condense it again?
Elliot, if you want to take on that project, I stand by you 100%. So that's all of our time for tonight. There's more in this source sheet. I'll email out the source sheet. If you're really interested in digging into some of the nitty gritty of milk and meat, I'm happy for you to do that. If you have questions, reach out, email me, happy to chat. I hope that everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving. We will be back next week to talk about, we're going to do mysticism and Hanukkah. So it'll be a cool combo. So Chassidut, some Jewish mysticism and Hanukkah. And then I believe we have 1 or 2 more weeks after that. But our class after that will be Shabbat, and it'll be poetry and song. So next week is mysticism and Hanukkah. The week after that is Shabbat and poetry and song. So that's what there is to look forward to. Thank y'all for being here tonight. I had a lot of fun. And I will see y'all again real soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thank you.
And to you.
I brought an example. So these were passed down to me as Passover plates by my grandparents. I don't know what to do with them. Like, because they're
Use them as passive.
no, but they're ceramic, and so I'm all like, well, hold on now. 'Cause,
So right, okay. So there's a concept in kashrut that if it hasn't been used for a year, then it can
It's
like
fine.
kind of revert to its natural
Okay.
form. Those I'm guessing
So
probably
the-
haven't been used in a lot more than a year.
oh yeah,
So a lot of people will say if you have china or other things that have been sitting away for a very, very long time,
okay,
take them to the mikveh
okay,
and then they're good to go.
okay,
So that would be my ruling on that.
okay.
It's especially one that people use for family heirloom type china that they don't know exactly where it's been and it's beautiful and they want to keep it and they don't want to smash it or give it away. So if it's been put away for a long time, many people would say, most people don't do a year, most people do like 5 years, 10 years. That I'm sure is like probably 20 to 30. That you can just take it to the mikveh and you're in good shape.
Cool. Good. Okay.
And then if anyone wanted to see the knife,
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
so it's called a halakha is the name for it. And you can see it has to be a straight blade. It can't have any it can't have a curve at either end or a hook or a point or anything. It has to be a totally straight blade because you have to be able to make a cut that can go back and forth without hooking on. Because the key is that you don't want it to tear. That if a bird's neck or an animal's neck is torn, then it's called a nevela or a torn animal. And so you want it to be able to slice through without catching or without tearing. So that's why you want it to be very sharp and very thin. The words that are used for the blade are, it has to be in Hebrew, daka, which means very, very thin. And so I have at home, I didn't bring them with me, but I have a series of stones that you sharpen it on and it gets successively sharper and smoother. And so the way you check is you actually check with your fingernail. So you run your fingernail along the blade and you try to feel for any rough patches or any spots. So it is very sharp, but this is, and it has my initials on it. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I might be shefting Michael Diedenhoffen's duck.
Ooh.
Yeah. But yeah, so I can only do birds. I can't do goats or larger
And the
animals.
blade works for all animals, correct?
So there are different size blades that you use for different animals. So it's a very similar blade, but you have a larger one for goats and a larger one for cows.
Okay.
So if you got the bigger knives, you can.
No, there are because in addition to learning about how to sharpen the knife, there's also lots of laws that you have to learn. I've only learned the laws around the kashrut of shechting birds, and I've only done shechting birds in front of a shochet to he gave me a certificate that says you are now qualified to do this. I would have to go through a whole nother process of learning and shechting with someone who was qualified in order to do sheep or goats or larger animals. So
You just gave him.
So if we got chickens, you could do that. You could do that.
yeah, absolutely. If you got chickens
Wow.
and you're done laying eggs, we could have chicken soup.
Nice. I will keep that in mind one day when we have chickens.
Except they're turkeys for Thanksgiving.
I want to, so chefing a turkey is much harder than chefing it because a chicken you hold in one hand, you chef with the other. Turkey, like someone has to hold it down. Another person like holds the head. It's like a whole thing. I've seen videos of people chefing turkeys. It's intense. Turkey?
Not check it, I stuffed it immediately.
Oh. Yeah, sounds about
We
right.
ate the turkey the next day.
Yeah.
If you can't, 'cause, like normally you dip them in like boiling
Scalded
water.
water, so you can't
Yeah,
do
yeah.
that. So if you don't have a good defeathering machine, then it just takes a really long time and it's really obnoxious and annoying. If you have a good defeathering machine, you put them through the defeathering.
Oh, okay. Okay. Cool.
All right. Oh, yeah, Cheryl?
Oh, that was Solomon. But do you have any tips on how to get the feathers out of? Because I don't buy poultry with skin very often.
Yeah.
But when you do, it's really hard to find poultry without feathers.
Right, because the reason for that is in the non-kosher slaughtering process, after you buy the chicken, they'll dip it in hot water, then it kind of releases the feathers and then they pluck them. But for kosher, you can't do anything that could cook the chicken at all before you kosher it, so they can't do that step.
So that's why you'll often find a few feathers here and there in your kosher chicken. And there's nothing you can try to pluck them out, but there's not really much you can do about it.
Gotcha.
All righty.
Sally says bye.
All right, I have my own class to go to now, so I'm gonna go to class, but I will see y'all later.
You said you were gonna.
Oh, yes.
It's a really warm sweater, so it's like the way